On Sunday, thousands of local anti-tourism protesters mobbed Tenerife's beaches as holidaymakers were trying to enjoy the sun. And similar protests occurred in other Canary Island destinations, including Gran Canaria and Lanzarote. Locals are demanding measures such as increased tourist taxes to be implemented to combat the issues that they face. Eoghan Corry, travel expert and Air and Travel magazine editor, joins me now. Eoghan, good morning.
Good morning from Hungary, Pat.
From Hungary, no less. I hope you're enjoying that particular country and not paying too much attention to its politics. We'll come back to that another time. Now,
we will do that another time, yeah.
Let's talk about what went on in the Canary Islands, because on one hand, you can understand the locals who are being priced out of accommodation and so on. On the other hand, tourism is a goose that's laying golden eggs for some.
Absolutely, Pat. It's quite unusual to get this in somewhere like the Canary Islands. The entire economy depends on tourism. It would be a very, very poor region if it went back to olives and bananas and vegetables. So what we've seen over the summer, though, is what started off as a small, well-platformed movement using social media grow to the level we saw on Sunday, where 30,000 people across different islands. There's another turn that happened on Sunday, which is a little bit different from what we've spoken about on this and other programmes, is that it was the first time I've seen tourists actually being targeted. Some of them were abused. People were surrounded on beaches. The protests so far have tended to be designed to send a message to the local politicians for the reasons that you outlined, but it's quite rare for tourists to be inconvenienced in any way apart from just seeing some graffiti and some posters.
Okay, now there were thousands of people involved. I looked at the video of the protests, and it must have been very discomforting for the tourists, some of whom are actually sympathetic but are part of the problem. And it's not just now the Canaries. There are other places we know, the overtourism in Barcelona, the overtourism in Venice, and there are many other places which are probably, Prague may be suffering from some of this as well. What to do?
What to do is basically, when I hear over tourism, it's basically a dispersal of tourists or bringing them at different times of the day. It's a problem that the tourism industry has faced all through its history. Everybody wants to go to the same places. You know, Barcelona is overcrowded. For many years, they've been complaining about the problems caused in the city by tourists. Tarragona is not. They would love to get the tourists, but people aren't going to send the Instagram picture back to America from a city they haven't even heard of. A lot of the cities of Europe are built for some of the ones I'm walking around. One of the ones I'm walking around this morning are built to withstand sieges with small, narrow streets. And the new army of tourists find it very difficult to move around. It's a big imposition on the locals. That's why Venice, Dubrovnik, Barcelona, they're the sort of places we've seen protest against over-tourism. That tends to be concentrated on things like inconvenience and pricing and accommodation, as you outlined. Northern Europe, it's also, we've had protests in Amsterdam and protests in Germany, and there also is the notion that tourism per se is wrong because of emissions. So you have a confluence of different arguments all coming together, but the real problem is, as you say, inconveniencing tourists is the first time we've seen it.
Okay, so they should just do what our hoteliers do, jack up the prices, and that'll stop people coming.
There are ways of managing it by price, and we've seen that with a day fee to be paid by people coming into Venice. And there's absolutely no doubt that in any of the major cities of Europe, that people like to go Venice or Dubrovnik, when you go in peak season, you're going to be paying more for everything. It is also an issue for locals. They are priced out of their own cafes and their restaurants. And what we see in the likes of the Canaries or the Balearics is that when the tourists come in large numbers, which they do in the summer, the waiters, the bar staff, all of those people have to move in as well. In the old days, there was a clear difference between tourist accommodation and accommodation that was available for rent for people, incoming service workers, and for the locals. And that difference has broken down since the arrival of peer-to-peer booking, tourist booking, accommodation bookings such as Airbnb and Vrbo.
All right. Now, on to another point, and Ryanair always gets a hammering whenever anything goes wrong, but this one probably might be deserved. People took 15 hours to get from Faro to Dublin because of the storm, multiple stops along the way, and Ryanair did not hand them out anything, not even a bottle of water.
Yeah, it's you're not entitled to free water.
That's what Ryanair said, you know.
Yeah, Ryanair pilots don't get free water. It's not it's not in the legislation now. It's quite interesting that we've had a raft of consumer legislation on this on passenger rights over the years, but it's never extended to free water. And there is a tradition in the old legacy airlines, and certainly in long haul and Aer Lingus, and the American carriers to this day, and the Middle Eastern carriers that operate out of Europe, that you get free water. Not the low cost Ryanair or their rivals. And we may see some change in that, because there are very clear meal entitlements and drink entitlements under EU 261 for flight delays. But if you're actually on the aircraft, those entitlements don't seem to exist at all.
Yeah, and then they landed in Liverpool, but were not allowed to disembark to use the facilities there. Because it was an EU to EU flight, Faro, Portugal to Dublin, Ireland, and therefore they were not allowed to disembark for all the complications that would involve.
We had a lot of diversions, a lot of fly-arounds. Quite a few of them went to England. One of them went all the way back to Switzerland. It was a very difficult day for passengers on Sunday. But there is the compensation. When something like a storm occurs, the compensation rights, even for your meal in the airport, don't apply, because it's seen as an act of God. It's something that I've seen consumer legislation moving more and more towards prescribing entitlements for passengers, regardless of the cause. And I suspect out of incidents like this, we may see a free water entitlement arising in EU consumer legislation. That's where it's going to come from.
All right, Eoghan, thank you very much for joining us. That's Eoghan Corry, a travel commentator and editor of Air and Travel magazine.